Good morning. So I'm going to answer some questions today about CNS response. Now, the good news is treatment for mental disorders has increased around the country. It's doubled in the last 20 years. But more people are getting more medications. The people leaving the doctor's office with 3 medications or more in the psychotropic drug class have doubled in the last 10 years. So, as you've seen in the general media now, we're covering this issue. There have been studies after studies that say there may not be much efficacy to these medications. They work about 30% of the time, the typical antidepressants and atypical antipsychotics. We spend a lot of money, according to McKinsey, $292 billion, of which about half of it is wasted. And doctors are essentially limited after you've failed 2 medication trials, after you've failed on 2 antidepressants, your likelihood of succeeding on the 3rd one is 14%, and on the 4th one is 13%. So doctors are guessing. The dominant treatment model in psychiatry after you fail 2 medications, and 17 million people have failed 2 medications, is trial and error. It affects almost all children who take medications because most drugs are not tested on children. Therefore, they're off-label and not FDA approved. And about 88% of the diagnoses in the DSM-4 manual that doctors use to diagnose actually have no indicated label drug. There's a researcher who's done a number of, he's actually a Pulitzer Prize winner, number of articles on this subject. And he's published a book this year called Anatomy of an Epidemic. He studied specifically the atypical antipsychotics, and he looked at, are more people after 30 years better or worse? Are more people on federal disability income for mental disorders? And in fact, that number tripled to 4 million by 2007, even though this is the renaissance of atypical antipsychotics, and we're using more of them now than ever before in history. The FDA has picked up on this and issued black box labels now for almost every medication in the category. So a psychiatrist is now looking on the one hand at black box labels that say suicidality, potential risk of diabetes, and on the other hand, I need to treat my patient, and in some cases like eating disorders, almost nothing on label to treat them with. This became particularly powerful when we began to talk to the military. And we've been talking to the Wounded Warrior Transition Units in the U.S. military. And in the New York Times about a month ago, there was an article that talked about the number of people who have died in the Wounded Warrior Transition Units, specifically as a consequence of too many contraindicated medications. Between 2006 and 2009, 101 soldiers died just from that. Not suicide, not battlefield injuries, but actually died because they had too many medications that weren't correct for them. When we think about mental disorders, a lot of times we think about, it's hard to measure, it's fluffy, how do you feel? Tell me about your childhood. But there are hard clinical endpoints in mental disorders and with the psychoactive drugs that we use to treat mental disorders. To payers, it's an economic proposition. Economic studies have been done that suggest $8,500 per patient per year is the cost consequence of being treatment resistant. That is, being one of those people who failed 2 or more medications in the psychotropic drug category. It's not behavioral cost. People who have 2 or more failures spend more time in the hospital, they go to the doctor more often, and they have nearly 4 times the inpatient claims of people who are not treatment resistant. They're tough patients. So the leader of psychiatry, arguably, is the head of the National Institute of Mental Health, Tom Insel. And he said this back in 2005. The DSM-4 book that we use has 100% reliability and 0% validity. We've got to develop biomarkers. We need some kind of physiology-based tool because today, after you've failed 2 meds, there is no test. There is no direct measure of the brain that the doctor will be able to do to tell which medications I might do well on and which medications you might do well on. So we need some kind of physiology marker that helps us get around this.
In 2001, when Frontline first reported on medicating children, the chief of ADHD research at the National Institute of Mental Health was Dr. Javier Castellanos. He acknowledged then that brain science was in its infancy.
He found that these resting EEG asymmetries in alpha were predictive of task performance.
Dr. Castellanos now advocates doing what pediatric cancer specialists did in the 70s. Back then, childhood cancer was an almost certain death sentence.
Does the antimatter? Constant question. The model is there. Every child with cancer in this country is part of a study. You can't get treated otherwise. Pediatric oncologists got together and said, we can't do this one by one. We have to form these associations.
By networking and comparing treatment regimens, doctors learned what worked and what did not. The system is still in place today.
We've been able to turn this around so that now it's at least 90% cure for childhood cancers. And that's a huge turnaround.
Everything that happens in the clinical treatment of kids with cancer is set up in such a way that you learn something. You learn something about what cancer is, how it should be treated. Think about the extraordinary public health impact of making that kind of principled commitment. That's what's missing. And in my view, it's scandalous.
It seems like such a simple thing to do. Just get doctors to provide outcome data referenced to some kind of physiology test. And in medicine, we actually have EEG, electroencephalography, that allows you to see brain function. It's a crude, old test. It works extraordinarily well in correlating medication response. It works so well, we decided we really ought to name this what it is. It is a pure online platform and a pure outcome database. And that references the fact that we really are dealing with doctors as our asset. And we've now been able to put it on an iPad in a wireless platform using Salesforce.com as our backbone so that we're actually able to scale infinitely. Physicians upload their files after doing an EEG for 10 to 20 minutes in the doctor's office. We give them access to our database to look at the correlations between that particular patient's neurophysiology and the outcomes on specific medications. And they send us back outcomes. Doctors pay to build our asset. By paying us for this report, they're actually contributing outcomes and paying to build this into a larger, more robust database, which can go into more areas. Specifically, our future targets are neurological findings like Alzheimer's and pain. We've grown the network of pure outcome physicians from a small group to a fairly large group now, and it produces this report. This report provides information by class and by agent on medication sensitivity referenced to a specific patient-personalized EEG. And that provides the doctor with confidence to not give them medications for which they may be at risk. And that's actually something that we're looking at with the military. Likewise, it provides confidence to prescribe older drugs like the tricyclics. This approach has better evidence than what we have today. That finding has been reached not only by United Biosource, who issued this report in 2008 that said, in fact, the evidence for reference to EEG exceeds what payers currently reimburse. It's also been more recently confirmed by payers themselves, one of whom we completed a technology assessment for and determined that, in fact, this is an approved procedure for pilot programs in selected regions. 22 studies have been done in this area, all confirming the correlation between electrophysiology and medication response. Our own study completed last year at Harvard, Stanford, Cornell, 12 multi-site study with 114 patients, showed clear separation between people receiving the best medicine we have today that only 10% of Americans have access to, STAR-D, for treatment-resistant depression, and people receiving a database-informed therapeutics based on referenced EEG. We beat them by 50 to 100% on their own primary endpoints and on 9 out of 12 of the total endpoints with strong statistical significance, p-values of 0.0002. So we believe, given that study and given the 3 studies that preceded it on our side and the 18 studies externally, we have the opportunity now to commercialize in a pretty significant market. We believe this is a $2.7 billion market simply for U.S. commercial reports alone. We charge $400 for our report to doctors. We charge $800 to payers. What payers get is the report and a trained, proficient set of doctors, a network, if you will, who can do this around the country. We think there are significant opportunities beyond that market. First, to go beyond treatment-resistant patients to all patients treated by psychiatrists. That would be a $4 billion market. or to go where 80% of the psychotropics are prescribed today. And most of us know this. Family physicians prescribe 80% of the antidepressants and other psychotropics. That's a $13 billion market if this becomes a first-line tool to inform prescribing. Why would we think of doing that? Because these medications aren't that expensive, because the cost of failure is $8,500. And if it's our kids, we don't want to see cost of failure. We don't want any failure. We don't want our kids to be trial and error lab rats for which medications might meet their particular physiology. So that's why our marketing focus has been on two places. The military, we think we owe our soldiers better than trial and error medicine. And moms. Moms determine the healthcare decisions for most people, their husbands, their kids, and moms do not want kids to be receiving trial and error medication. So we think we have a converging market. We think we have a market where, in fact, most of our advertising is being done by other people every day. The military is in the news almost every week in U.S. news on the problems in mental health care. Payers and government have passed the Mental Health Parity Act that says mental health therapies must be paid on the same basis, including the same scientific criteria. Consumers are activated. We've been in Oprah Magazine. We've been in Newsweek. The Medicated Child is a documentary on PBS that goes into this specific issue. And scientific and pharma leadership, we see people like Tom Insel at NIMH saying the diagnostic book doesn't work. It doesn't correlate well to treatment outcomes. We need something better. We have to introduce some physiology into this equation. Our commercial model is pretty simple. We get calls from commercial carriers, from physicians, from consumers. We traffic those into our national network. We have people in other countries, but still our throw weight is in the U.S. An EEG is recorded in the office of one of our doctors who wirelessly uploads it to our secure servers. We then correlate that, provide them with an output report that can either go to their fax machine or their printer or their iPad. The reason we wanted it to be iPad is twofold. One, we wanted them to be able to show a patient their brain. But two, we wanted them to be able to give us outcomes in the most seamless way possible. Literally, just give us outcomes wirelessly by clicking a button as you're going through the review of the report with the patient. So as I said, the three market focuses we have: first, build a strong network of doctors; second, do pilot programs with payers where they pay for this in selected regions or selected clients; and third, standard payer reimbursement. We think we're well on our way towards achieving the milestones that we have for those markets. First, in discussions with the military, we see a clear need here. 300,000 troops have returned with treatment-resistant PTSD or major depression, and it's been identified as one of the top priorities by the Joint Chiefs of Staff. In fact, when they looked at the results of our study, one thing that popped out is we did better. We saw this separation between us and STAR-D, medicine that most troops don't get. But more than that, we got to the same place they got, 20% improvement in half the time. And that's, look at week 6, we're statistically significant separation, and we got to the same place they did in half the time. Then we went on to get to 48% remission under clinical global improvement. So the people who looked at that from the military said, wow, you guys are, you could double our productivity. And we only have 408 psychiatrists throughout the military. That's an important thing to do. The program we offer payers is pretty simple. As I said, it's $800, and it covers the cost of the report plus the cost of training and scaling and in-servicing a provision network. But we think the reason that they will pay, and we're talking to all of the major carriers, is they get a direct savings, $8,500 annual negative annuity, the cost of treatment resistance, versus $800 for this report. We also think it has superior evidence, so they have to pay for it under parity. Step therapy, we think it gives them an opportunity to exhaust all pharmacological remedies before they move on to some of the more expensive and esoteric treatments like transcranial magnetic stimulation or electroconvulsive therapy, both of which are FDA approved and both of which are part of the clinical guidelines for depression. We also think it's just a big gain in treatment facility. If you see mental health parity increasing the amount of treatment being done in mental health, then you want to have a network that can scale to that. And most of the payers only have networks that scale to the current volume. As I said, mental health parity was passed in 2008. It will be fully effective by July of this year. It provides for reimbursing mental health therapies at the same level with no more utilization review or gatekeeping than you do on the health plan side. Milliman and Mercer, the global actuaries, both say this will double or triple mental health care spending. It's not that much to begin with. Doubling or tripling means a lot, and it's fully effective by July of 2011. Finally, we think that there is a pharma business here. If you can predict the right medication for the patient, help the doctor with that information using outcome data and a patented process to correlate it with existing FDA-approved devices, then you ought to be able to do the same thing with pharma, interrogating compounds and looking at how many different diagnoses do those compounds potentially help. We plan to use this in drug discovery for neurological findings like Alzheimer's, as well as for psychotropic medications. We think that ultimately could be the bigger market for this company. We were cited by PatentVest, one of these stock screeners, as having being in the top 200 to 4,000 life sciences companies, specifically and only for having a valuable set of patents. They look at how many times your patents are cited by others. We are now getting our 12th patent and our 5th in the U.S. We don't believe that this is a regulated product from the standpoint of a typical FDA device, because there is no device. It is literally a set of tables of outcomes which are correlated to approved FDA standard digital EEG and approved FDA quantitative EEG. So we believe what we're doing is very closely associated with the HITECH Act, use of electronic health records, or clinical outcome registries under AHRQ. But we ultimately believe that the FDA may someday regulate this, and we'll cooperate with them in coming up with regulations that fit the kind of IT solution that this is. But in the meantime, we believe, very much like genomic health and others, that this is an area where the law is yet to be written, and we'd like to help provide the guidance for that. We think valuation drivers for the company over the next 12 to 18 months are going to be things like additional peer-reviewed publications. We have several in the pipeline. Successful payer technology assessments. We've just received another, as I mentioned. New patents and patent defense announcements. We also have just received 2 more, as I mentioned. Military and payer pilot announcements. Those we expect to be forthcoming this year. Payer reimbursements under appeal. So for those payers who say, we're not going to play ball, we're going to deny this, we believe that there's a successful appeal strategy. And we're looking at other companies who are winning on appeal now, like Neuronetics with their transcranial magnetic stimulation, or TMS product. So we believe that foreshadows the future of reimbursement under parity, and it is successful. And pharma discovery contracts, which we'll discuss more as the year goes on. So we think this is a really exciting period. Thanks very much.